I'm Julian. I grew up in New Jersey, and I went to Alexander Hamilton Elementary School.
Named after the musical.
That's right.
No. Well, it's really a pleasure to have you back again, Julian. Thanks for making
Pleasure
the
to
time.
be here.
And Julian really knows our team, our company, and has sort of watched us for many years. So it's great having you. But let's start at the beginning again, Julian. So tell us about Alexander Hamilton Elementary in your younger years.
Well, the best thing I can remember about Alexander Hamilton was there's two things. We had this giant Nabisco factory near our school. And remember, Nabisco makes cookies. And so all of my friends, we remember getting out on recess, you get outside and you smell this cookies.
Oh, man.
Because they're just baking cookies. Like it would be the equivalent of being over in Glen Wild, you know. And you couldn't see it because there's a little hill, but you just smelled it all the time. So there was the smell of cookies. Unites all my friends. And then the other thing is that they had that hill, and it was a fantastic sledding hill. And so, not when we were at school, but we'd go to that place and sled down that hill, and onto the soccer or football field, whatever it was. And it was a good. Those are my best memories from elementary school.
And where was this again? I'm sorry. Where?
This is at the elementary school in Glen Rock, New Jersey.
New Jersey.
Yeah.
New Jersey. So you're actually used to snow country then. You grew up with
Yeah,
snow
we
around.
usually had white Christmases and had some snow, and my mother's from Norway, so I grew up skiing. We would go up to the Catskill Mountains. It was about an hour or two drive, and I learned to ski up there, and so skiing was a healthy part of growing up, and I've always enjoyed that sport. And then what a thrill to actually be able to come to Park City. That was not something I planned or said I'm just going to go there and ski. I just when I had the opportunity, I was like, wait, I can really do this? I could live in Park City, Utah? What an amazing opportunity! And that was, gosh, I think it was 14 years ago. It's time flies.
And your household epitomizes the melting pot that is the U.S. You said your mother was from Norway, and your father is from?
My father's from Rome, Italy. They met in New York. And my father's a doctor. My mom was a ballet dancer, and then she worked for the UN, and that brought her to New York. So she was part of the Norwegian contingent at the UN, and she was there, and met my father in New York, and they had a very idyllic romance in Manhattan. So when I watch the romantic comedies about New York City, I think about my parents.
That's so cool.
They met there.
Did you grow up hearing any Italian or Norwegian at home?
Oh yeah, of course. So my grandparents would come over. They didn't speak English. They were full on Italian or Norwegian, and my parents tried to get me to learn both languages. I actually learned Italian reasonably well. So by the time I was in college, I went and did a semester abroad, and I was able to speak Italian well enough to get by. Norwegian I never quite picked up enough, but it was kind of neat to have family from Europe, and we went there several times. And that's our vacations. We would go to Norway, we'd go to Italy, and have relatives there who made great food, and it was wonderful.
That's so cool. That's so cool. So please tell us about your persona, your personality back then. I imagine a really studious young man who always had perfect grades and always studied hard, but somehow managed to also be a jock at the same time.
Well, you're making me laugh because I'm thinking about my kids, and I guess everyone holds your kids up to a higher standard, right? And the truth is, I was just a kid. I was a kid that was just trying to have fun, trying to fit in, and I had a very good childhood, but I wasn't. I didn't really become a good student until high school, and I don't know exactly how that happened, but it wasn't bad. I just kind of was doing what everyone else was doing. I think as a kid you try to do like the bare minimum to kind of just fit in and not stand out and embarrass yourself. At least that's what I did. So I did what I needed to do, but I wasn't. I don't think I was a gifted child. It was like loving schoolwork. My daughter actually is. I mean, my two sons are, I call them Neanderthals. They just don't care, but I was probably like them.
So what was high school like? And did it involve a topic I know you're very passionate about, football?
It did, and then it's come full circle. So football was an important part of my growing up. I was my parents were European, and so they weren't really into football. I had an uncle, Uncle Luigi, Napolitano in New Jersey. So I had a very Italian, like we can go into all the stereotypes. So that that's the way I grew up. Okay, awesome. Just the big meals and all that. He was a big Giants fan. He would take me to the Giants games, and so I became a football fan. And I kind of had this secret life with him where he would show me football, and I'd get really excited about it. And my parents were like, no, you don't want to play football. You can play soccer or other things. And it actually, I think it was kind of transformative for me because I was playing soccer. I was on the swim team, and I guess it was my freshman year. I resolved that I wasn't going to play football, and I was at a swim team practice or something coming back, and I remember I ran into a friend of mine who was in his football pads, and he just wasn't a big guy, and I was like, this is crazy. Like, he's playing, I'm much bigger, and stronger than that guy. I should play, and so I just went home and I just declared, Mom, I'm done with this. I'm playing football, and so I started playing football freshman year, and it wasn't that football was all my life, but it was the element that transported me to just deliver me confidence. I did very well at it. I became the captain of the team, and I ended up becoming a contributor very early as a young freshman and a sophomore, and that just gave me confidence I didn't find anywhere else. All of a sudden, it's a very obvious measuring stick. Like you win the race, you don't. You win the fight, you don't. You score, you don't. You make the team, you don't. And I managed to be successful there, and that gave me confidence in everything else. So I remember my sophomore year when they put me in at varsity. I was terrified, and I survived. And then the next day, I was like, hey, I just played a varsity football game. And the seniors were like, instead of me being afraid they're going to pick on me, I was like, one of them. And that just transported my confidence level, and my grades completely changed based on that. I just had confidence, and that allowed me to get better grades. It allowed me to have confidence. I became active in school government, and so I had a very good last few years in college or high school where I had good grades. I was the president of the class, and I attribute most of that to football. Just it gave me confidence.
Amazing, and I love your comments about the moment you decided to make it happen. So it was literally that circumstantial. It was.
I assumed I wasn't going to play, and it was just something. I ran into a friend, and he's like, "Why aren't you playing?" And I was like, "I don't know. I should go home and talk to my parents about this." And I did, and I found myself. It was a sport. I'm not the fastest guy in the world, but I had a combination of size, strength, and grit that allowed me to be successful. And it's just the point wasn't that it was football. I found something I could be successful in. That gave me confidence, which gave me confidence in the grades or in school to go for it, right? Oh yeah, I'll take the AP class. I'll take this. I'll run for student this or that. And before that, I was kind of I was a little shy. I was kind of hanging in the shadows, and just getting by. And this gave me the confidence to step up and go for it a little bit, and that I attribute a lot to. So the reason I'm talking so much about football is I coach it now. And I thought that was over. And I've had the opportunity to coach my kids here in Park City. I coached through the youth league, 7th and 8th, and the same thing with my kids. They wanted to play football, and my wife's like, "No, you're not going to play football." And I was like, "Oh, here we go again." I'm in the same boat. So I had the conversation. I said, "Well, let me tell you how it worked out for me." And so my wife was a little mixed, but we were both nervous about football. You hear all the stories, and so we decided that if they really wanted to play, they could play in 7th grade, but I had to talk with them. So if you want to play, you have to be serious about it. And so I took them in 7th grade, and they started playing. And ironically, I got recognized in the sideline and said, "Hey, will you come over here and hold the bag?" And by the third or fourth practice, I was the head coach of the team. And so I've been coaching I coached for 3 years. I coached my eldest son, and then I coached my middle son for 2 years. And then I just joined the high school program last year. And let me tell you, that was a really neat thing. So all the emotions of anxiety and excitement and just you're the big game. I mean, it's a really it's a really special thing. I thought I'd left those in a closet, like tucked away with my yearbook and my varsity jacket. And all of a sudden, I'm on the high school field. I'm like, wow, I'm getting ready for a game. And I got just as nervous. And I the night before, I'm pacing around. I'm up at 6 a.m. checking my plays like 15 times. And I had that same anxiety and excitement about a football game. And so I've really had a privilege to be able to be part of it. And to be able to be there on the field when my kids are on there has been just an incredible privilege. I know that sometimes it's a lot of work because I'm trying to juggle that with work and family. Yeah. But I'll sit there and I'll look at the ski mountain, I'll look at the PC, and I'll say, okay, my son's over there with the lineman, my other son's over here with receivers, and I'm on the field. This is pretty special, and it's been a really fun opportunity.
That's so cool. I see more than the anxiety you talk about. I see the passion. I mean, you're just so passionate about it. It's so wonderful. That's fantastic. So you go through high school and you summit the ecosystem that is high school, doing so well and gaining that confidence. Does that then translate to what you decide to do for college? What do you do after that?
It did actually. I ended up applying for college, and I ended up going to Amherst College, and I ended up playing football there. And so that ended up being a reasonable amount, part of my collegiate experience. And I think it was a big part of what I got in. I had a history teacher, Alan Diet, who was a real special teacher. He was one of my mentors. And he said, you should look at Amherst College. And I didn't really know, now it's kind of a factory about, how you study about schools and you send letters and do all that. Back then it wasn't so much, but I remember he told me that he went and played football at Amherst College and he wanted to introduce me to the coach, and he did, and I think that had a big role in helping me get into what was a very challenging school to get into, and it was a very academically rigorous school, and it was a great place to go. So that was in Massachusetts. I went to Amherst College and was a political science major.
And how did you pick political science?
That's a good question. I think I just was interested in it. I think at the time I thought I might go into law. And I was interested in just how we govern ourselves and how we work as a society. And it seemed like an interesting topic. I was a political science major with an economics minor. And I ended up doing both of those and writing a thesis with the most liberal college professor, and then my advisor was the most conservative. And so in fact, that's how I got into. I got my first job. Was I was interested in this course I was taking with the liberal guy, and so I started doing this. It was actually on tort liability for drinking and driving. I don't know how I picked that topic, but it was like, who should be responsible if someone drinks and gets into an accident? Should you be able to sue the bar? Should you be able to sue the alcohol manufacturer? So anyway, I was with this Professor Austin Serrett, and these guys were obviously rivals. And so my advisor said, "You're doing what? You can't do a paper with him." Well, if you're going to do it, I'm in part of this too. And so I ended up having both of those guys being my advisors for this thesis, and that was an interesting experience, as you can imagine. I ended up somehow figuring out how to appease them both, which has been kind of a theme in my life, in terms of how to bring people together or find middle ground. And I remember when I was interviewing, someone had previously gone to Amherst, knew both those people, and they said, "You did what?" And that was somehow got me noticed when I was being recruited for my first job, which ended up being at Goldman Sachs.
I always love how, looking at incredibly successful, driven people like you now, when you go back to the roots of their story, how maybe the word circumstantial is a little too strong, but how I suppose it is to some degree circumstance or a moment, just momentary decisions that sort of drive you, whether it's to football or political science because of a temporary affinity at the time or something like that, and then this senior paper that you're talking about. It's
yeah, none of it was planned.
It's not like you sat at age 4 and said, "I'm going to do this."
Yeah, no, going back to, I have hope that my boys might find that right click and find the right path and do that, because they're good kids. I tease them, but my daughter actually is showing interest and willingness and at an early age. But the truth is, I didn't. So, you never know what's going to be that catalyst that gives you a chance to have an opportunity, and then will you seize that opportunity? And I got very lucky.
So you alluded to your first job, Julian, just a second ago, but again, you never thought of yourself back then as this driven person, yet you went to a great college, you played football, and before that you had a great experience in high school, and now you were alluding to your first job. Did you not sense how driven you were? Do you really feel like selecting Goldman Sachs as the place you're going to apply is something most people think of doing?
I was a little naive, is the truth. I got very lucky. There was a whole group of people. In fact, I just saw them at a wedding. I was at a wedding in Napa Valley with a bunch of Amherst alum. There was a whole group of people who really were plugged in, like my daughter, and they knew that Goldman Sachs was a really impressive place to work. And they were all lined up and studying and getting ready for this. And I was more like, I just saw the line. I said, well, maybe I should go and interview there too. And I ended up interviewing in banking and consulting. Those were very popular jobs, but I didn't get a streak in junior year and say, I'm going to go do that, because if I can go do this, I could do that, I could do this. I really just focused on trying to do the best I could at where I was. And when it came time for the recruiting, there happened to be a large crowd there, and I showed up and said, what's this all about? And much to the consternation of some of those people who've been working, and again, this is back when we had newspapers, they'd read the Wall Street Journal and they'd talk about stocks, and I couldn't tell you the first thing about a stock, right? But I showed up, and I managed to somehow, a little bit of an imposter syndrome, but I managed to get through the process and get a job. But to your point about Goldman Sachs, I didn't know what Goldman Sachs was. I had a couple of offers, and I remember talking to Prudential Beige as a opportunity. I just liked the team. I thought they were pretty good people. I thought it's all the same. It's investment banking. It's New York. Who cares what? And someone grabbed me and said, "Dude, you got an offer from Goldman. You go there." And I don't know who it was, but someone was good enough to tell me that. And I kind of knew in the back of my mind, but I was being a little bit of a rebel. And then finally, someone kind of told me, "No, that is like the Harvard of banks. You should go there." And so I was fortunate enough I did.
Goldman in New York City before they went public.
Yes.
Which is amazing. So please describe how you made things happen, because I think that was some of the most meaningful part of your journey last time we talked about what it was like those first years at Goldman and how you handled it.
Yeah, that was an exciting time. I still read about this stuff today. It recently came up, there was this revolt about the analysts working too hard, and some of it was at Goldman, and I recognize all that because that's what it was like. You showed up, it was kind of like football. You showed up, they had a class of 120 people, and we showed up and we were all wearing our best suits, and we were nervous and anxious, and we were thrown in a room, and there was a Harvard Business School professor up front, and it was like, bang, you're on right now. You're starting to be taught, and sink or swim. And it was a very intense competitive environment, but that was a lot of fun. It was really a ton of fun. And I was just so excited that I was there, Harvard Business School professor. That's pretty cool, right? I looked around, am I in the right room? Am I supposed to be here, right? And so I was just thrilled to do it. And I was just, terrified that, someone would figure out that I was the football player guy who's really not supposed to be here. I hadn't studied all the finance classes and all that, but to me it was just about competition. I enjoyed what I learned at investment banking, but for me it was like making the all-American team, right? It was like, all right, this is a hard thing to do. You're here with a bunch of smart people from around the world, and you're thrown in a thing and you have to compete. And so for me, it was just another training camp or the combine. And I was like, okay, this is great. I get it. I was sizing people up and saying, all right, how do I not get kicked out of this group? How do I succeed and do it? And so we worked really hard, and we learned a lot. We worked really hard. We partied really hard. We lived in Manhattan. We were paid too much. And it was an incredible 2 years. It ended up being 3 years. But I learned so much. I made great friends. The first guy that one of the first guys I met, I remember meeting the group from Japan. So like there was all these people from all over the world. There were people from London, people from Germany, a group from Japan, and I remember meeting this guy from Japan, and I was just recently I was one of the best men in his wedding, and recently his son came and visited me here in Park City, because he lives in Tokyo, and his son was at Dartmouth, and his son was like coming skiing and came and visited me, and so I made friends that I still have today. Some lifelong friends in that group.
That's really cool. Do you think, what was it about Goldman that made it that kind of culture?
It was, I think that there was a lot of different cultures on Wall Street at the time. It's a program that exists today. My nephew wants to be a banker, and I've actually set him up with some of the people I've set you up with, so he can interview these people, or they can interview him and talk to about. It's a competitive job. It's a kind of a cutthroat job, but you get a chance to learn very, very rapidly, and you're put in positions where most people don't get that exposure. When you're, and so Goldman was one of the better ones, and it was a very good, collaborative, positive culture place. There were other ones that you can, there's books about that, that were a little bit more cutthroat and a little more competitive. People were competitive with each other, and so I was aware of that. But in general, it was just a situation where at a very young age, you're going to be in the room with CEOs and board members and CFOs who are talking about the most important decision in the company's lifetime, right? So you're in the room, and the president or CEO of Dole Foods is talking about selling the company, and the partners are talking to him about that, and I'm just like, I'm in this room. This is pretty cool. And so it was just kind of a high bar, where you felt very privileged to be there, and the hours didn't matter, right? It was kind of like being in the military or something. It's just like, hey, you get to be in that meeting. That's something most people never get to experience. What a great opportunity. You better work really hard. You better not screw up.
Are you a believer that was a cultural norm in Manhattan back then? I won't name the decade, even though I know which one it is. Or does that and can that exist today?
That's an interesting question. It wasn't unique to Goldman Sachs. It was, I've got friends who are at different banks, and it's the same. It's a boot camp. Let's face it. It's a boot camp where they get young college kids and they run them through this program, and they get 80 hours a week from you, and for them it's fairly cheap. For us, it's like, well, that's a lot of money, and I get to sit in this room. So it's kind of a win-win. You got to know what you're getting into. I don't know. When I read the articles today, and people are protesting, and they're complaining and saying that this is inhumane or whatever it might be, I don't know if it's changed. I can't imagine it's harder, right? We were just so thrilled to be there, right? And so no one was complaining and saying that we should be working less or that. Because it was very clear. If you want to work less, there's a lot of other jobs to go to. But you're trying to keep your seat at this table. And so you're going to, that's really all you did. You worked and you slept. And you went to the bars when you had a few moments.
And there was no football in there, so had football disappeared for a few years for you?
It disappeared, and not until 4 years ago had it reappeared. I did go through some withdrawal, because after 8 years, I remember in the fall I'd kind of get itchy, and I'd be like, I should be on the field. What's going on? But no, football took a long hiatus until here in Park City, where I'm coaching.
So I don't want to interrogate you about the rest of your very impressive career, but I'd love for you to highlight that a little bit, and then I'd love to turn it over to the team to get your take on things. So I do know that at one point you decided to go back to school. So maybe you could talk to us just a little bit about the journey beyond Goldman. Yes. In retrospect, that may not have been the best decision, but to leave, you mean? Because I was at Goldman Sachs, and again, to the naivete, I was like, this is a 2-year job. They offered me to stay for three, so I stayed for 3. And then I remember there was a discussion like, you could just stay here. And I was like, well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if I want to be a banker my life. I mean, it seemed like a lot of work. I knew the trade-off. I seemed like the senior bankers, a lot of them were getting divorced, and it didn't seem like, it wasn't what I wanted to do. But now in retrospect,
being a direct promote at a pre-IPO Goldman would have been a good situation. But
really?
Yeah. I've got I've got a handful of friends who stayed or were there, like my first associate, and yeah, I mean, I'm aware that I left some money on the table with that.
Just a little.
Yeah. But for me, it was about like, okay, I've had this experience. I proved that I could show up, I could succeed. So for me, it was all about like, can you make the team, and can you be a starter? It was the same mentality, right? And I had done that, and so now I was like, well, I want to. Well, there was a moment when I was carrying the bag, which is what the analyst does, right? You do all the work, you do all the spreadsheets, you create the presentation, and you show up and you carry the bag. And then like back then, the road shows, like you'd be in this giant auditorium with hundreds of people, and they'd go up and they'd give a speech, and that was really, they were telling you about the company so you can invest in it. Now a lot of that happens digitally, but that was effectively a real road show. And I remember carrying the bag and just the senior partner on my team got up and introduced, said, okay, we're going to take this company public. The timeline is this. We're going to come in at probably at $13 to $15, and if you want to buy shares. And I was like, that's so trivial. I could give a shit about, the price per share, right? But then the other guy got up, and this is back during the Gulf War, and he's like, well, we had to ship our parts, across to Europe and in the Middle East, and we had to use because of the war, we had to use this kind of shipping. And he was talking about running a business with thousands of people and getting his product shipped around the world during a war. And I was like, okay, that looks like a really interesting job. I don't want to be the guy who's just selling stock, right? At the end of the day, which is what it is. I mean, the reason Goldman Sachs makes money is they're in front of a bunch of money, right? And you can be an expert at that, and you can learn a lot. But I remember thinking, okay, I don't want to be the first speaker, I want to be the second speaker.
You want to be the guy running it. You want to be the guy doing the company.
So for me, I kind of made that realization. And so I figured that, I wanted to go learn how to run companies, not how to finance them only. So I wanted to go to business school. And there was a nice pipeline from the banks to the business schools, and I applied to, several of the best, and was fortunate enough to get into Harvard. And so that was just incredible, again, just an incredible situation. Like, you get into Harvard, you go, right? And I remember, I was waiting for the Stanford to see if I got into Stanford, and like my uncle Luigi called and said, I understand you're going to Harvard. I'm like, I guess I am. And so I did, and that was an awesome experience, and made some great friends, actually enjoyed my business school experience more than my college experience.
Wow.
I just loved it. It was, I don't know, something about the connectivity and the intensity, and I just related with the group so well. I made some of the best friends in my life that I'm much closer to now than my college friends. So I love that. And then, just to fast forward a little bit, I kind of doubled down on that, saying, okay, if I've done the finance thing, how do I prepare myself to be able to be a leader of a company? And I researched the various roles, and I figured that management consulting was kind of like banking in that it's a competitive, very intense, high-level exposure type of role, but instead of financing companies, you're helping them with marketing strategies or operation strategies or M&A strategies or whatever it might be. So I decided I wanted to be a consultant and end up going to McKinsey as a consultant to try to balance the financing of companies and then the strategy of companies. And so I was very lucky to have those two experiences. Between that and business school, I felt like I was really well prepared to kind of just set off on the journey in business.
It's amazing, and again, it's for those of us who know you well. It's funny how you put it so nonchalantly. I ended up going here, and after doing this, these are the biggest names in the most competitive fields and the hardest things to do. Yet I don't think you appreciate how much you describe not just the intensity, but in every case you say, but I loved it. I loved competing and working hard and winning and growing. And I hope you see that in yourself, but maybe you don't.
Well, you and I've had conversations before, and you're kind enough to dig into it. I don't talk about this a lot, but it's through conversations like this. When you ask me what was it about, it was really about the competing, right? Because until you select an industry, these were generic jobs where you know, you're a service provider at a very competitive place. So it really kind of was like just a competition. There's 120 people in the room, 20 of them are going to get kicked out, and 20 of them are going to get promoted. And the other 80 are, you know, are going to be, you know, in the norm. And so it was very much of a competitive dynamic where you had to, it was understood, you know, these places are all pyramids, right? And you start at this level with the most people coming in, and it's competitive to get in. So it was very much, that was the dynamic. And that was very consistent with where I was at that stage of my life. So I guess it was just consistent with what I was trying to do. Find the most competitive competition, try to get in, and then try not to get kicked out. And so that was the mode I was in, versus a very, you know, I'm going to go do this, and I'm going to go do this and do that. Other than when I saw the CEO giving the speech, that was the first time where I said, okay, maybe that's what I want to do. Before that, I was really just trying to see if I can make it.
I really appreciate that, Julian. I'd love to give the team an opportunity to ask some questions, and I'm hopeful that the questions may give you an opportunity to at least touch on your VacationRoost chapter, which I know is a really important chapter for you.
Sure.
And even more recently than that. But with that, let me turn it to the team. Kimber.
So I have a comment and a question. One that kind of stood out. So the comment first, which is, you know, Sam, you made the observation that you just kind of fell into these things, but you were actually passionate about it. And I was listening to a podcast the other day, and it was talking about grit and how people think, oh, I just need to have more grit in things. But it may actually be that the people that have grit and put in the time to be successful, they've just found the thing that they're passionate about. And so, you know, just kind of putting that out there, if you're trying to be successful at something but you don't like it, you know, people want to be fit, but if you don't like working out, you're not going to put in the time. But then you have people that love working out and they're very fit, but it's something that they like. So anyway, just making an observation that you kind of found the things that you liked and that challenged you, and therefore you were able to put in the energy and the time. So kind of an observation.
Thank you.
That's a great point. I think that's very true. It's not so much a priori, I'm going to grit this out and struggle through it. It was like, hey, I get to be here. I get to be here, right? How do I not get kicked out of the room?
Yeah. And I guess my question for you is not actually related to that. It was more, you know, I know a lot of people that were the high school quarterback or the cheerleading team, and that kind of ends up being the pinnacle because they don't learn all the things that actually they need to do. Like they're naturally good, they're naturally pretty, they're whatever it is. And so high school ends up being the pinnacle. What do you think for you? You know, we were successful in football in high school. How did you kind of break through that? And not have that be your pinnacle?
I think that the easiest answer is I wasn't like naturally pretty. You know, I was blessed with some relative size, but I had to work really hard and I never, while I achieved a lot, I guess my attitude was like, you know, I was ready to be cut at any moment. I was like so grateful that I was there. You know, whatever the situation was, whether it was, you know, making the varsity team in high school or then in college, like, oh gosh, I mean, I remember the first day, like I walk in the room, it's just like Goldman Sachs. Like I remember huge guys with beards and like, you know, just they looked like, you know, Tarzan, and I'm like, am I in the right place? Like I don't belong here. So I never felt like I was the star. I felt like, okay, shit, I'm gonna get beat up, and I better work my ass off just to succeed and not get kicked off, and maybe they'll figure it out. Maybe, you know, no one will figure out that I'm really not. I don't look like that, you know. I remember the first day. I remember my parents dropping me off, and the look in my mom's face. She's like, she was scared, and I was scared, you know. So to some extent, I know what you're talking about. And the success I had in football was, you know, some of it can go to your head, but at the end of the day, I was very quickly on to the next thing, and the next level was like, okay, can you play in college? You're gonna get it's gonna end here. You're gonna get found out that you really aren't good enough to play in college, or you're gonna end here. You're not smart enough to compete at you know, Goldman Sachs or with a Harvard Business School professor. Like it was always like, oh my God, I got to really work hard to compete at this level.
Thank you.
Thanks, great question. Alan.
You know, as you were talking through your life, you seem like a guy every moment counts, you know, and you made every moment count in as far as your learning and your growth and all those things. What's the thing that you're most proud of personally and professionally?
Let's see. That's a great question. So, yeah, I'm still on the journey. So I honestly don't know. There were milestones. I remember the first time where I kind of became a CEO. I remember thinking this was it, right? And that's when I moved to Park City. I remember thinking, okay, I'm a CEO, and I finally made it. And then I realized that it was just another competition. It was it wasn't it. And I never got to be the star quarterback who just sits back and says, okay, look at me, I'm great. Like it's always been a, I don't want to use the word struggle because I've been incredibly blessed, but like when I became a CEO, I was in the fire. It turned out the economics of our company weren't as good as we hoped, and we went into a recession in I don't know when it was, 2008, when I was CEO for 6 months when Lehman failed. So it became an immediate crisis. So there was no time to actually sit there and say, all right. I mean, I know that I was excited because I've been working at, I was on the corporate ladder. I became a CFO of this company, and I was doing that. And I was like, when do I become the CEO? And that was my target. And I became a CEO, and I realized it was just a burden of responsibility. Now I had 100 people I was responsible for, and Lehman fails, and the board saying, should we shut this thing down? And so I never really got the chance to kind of sit there and say, "Wow, this is great!" Right? It was in that case, it was a struggle with VacationRoost. It was a company that we bought, and we were competing. So there's a little background. I moved to Utah to start a company called VacationRoost, and we acquired a couple companies in the ski business, and we basically were trying to build what's today Airbnb or VRBO. And that was the idea. It was very clear that people weren't going to rent homes using catalogs in the future, which is kind of how I grew up doing that. And so I was really passionate about it. I said, this is what I love doing more than anything else is renting homes. I want to be part of creating this category. And so I went after it, and the achievement was actually getting it together. I ended up having to go buy a company and find financing and pulling it all together. That really was the work of putting all those pieces together. Once I got it together, and then I actually got to move to Park City, which was a bonus on top. So I thought, man, this is it. You're going to actually get to work in an industry you love in Park City, Utah, and you get to be a CEO. I thought that was going to be awesome. And I remember I'm sure there was a month or so. I think I had a wine bottle when we closed the deal where I was like, okay, that's it. And then, like I said, we were at a board meeting when Lehman failed, and we'd just been in it 6 months, and it ended up being a really, really difficult business that we had some success. We were able to do a lot of things. We were able to double or triple the business, but just like you guys have metrics, Bassam and I were talking about it this morning about metrics, and if you want to hit the next level, you guys are already a great company. You are already doing great things, but you're looking forward, right? You're not talking about you don't want to repeat this year, next year, do you? Right? When you talk about what you're going to do next year, you're talking about how you can stretch and get to the next level. It was the same thing there, because we're both privately funded companies, right? We had a private equity company firm funding us. You guys are self-funded. Maybe you guys will look at venture capital, but once you have that, you're on this treadmill of you have to get to this level. And for us, it ended up being a 9-year journey where we were trying to get that level, and we got really close, but we never quite got to that point. We never got to be the Airbnb or the VRBO. We were part of that ecosystem, and we contributed to it. We were part of that ride. So, but it would end up being a story that we weren't the success. And turns out in that game, there were 2 or 3 really good successes out of the 100 that showed up to try, and we were one of those 100. And so it was a wonderful experience, but it wasn't what I kind of had built it up to be in my mind, if that makes sense. Mike.
So, being at HBS and McKinsey, these really competitive places where people go from there to do extraordinary things, did you ever, as you were going through the struggles with VacationRoost, fall into comparing yourself with those peers, and did that make the experience even harder?
you're pushing the scab right there, man. I like what, just like yesterday? Absolutely, absolutely. At the end of the day, everyone goes on their unique journey, and I made some choices, and yeah, I mean, I have. It's a humbling thing to go to reunions, and you're talking to captains of industry, and I've accomplished plenty of things, but there's definitely some some envy or some frustration, because there are different paths. Like I say, I could have stayed at Goldman Sachs and been there when they went public, and that right there would have been a huge opportunity. On the flip side, I don't think I'd be coaching football in Park City, Utah. I don't think I'd be raising the family I am right here in Utah, and I don't think I'll be having the opportunities that I'm creating now. So you never know how it's going to end, but there are dark days where I have those thoughts, certainly.
Thank you. Sean?
I was curious what you think VRBO and Airbnb did that VacationRoost didn't, that helped propel them.
Great question. So VRBO, they won by being the biggest and the fastest. So Brian Sharples, who was the CEO of HomeAway, who I actually now work with, ironically, at Next Coast Ventures. So it's come full circle. When we set out at the same time trying to do this, and I was actually at Prime Media at the time, we both recognized that this was an opportunity, and I tried to get Prime Media to go and say, we're going to acquire all these different little websites and create the biggest consolidated winner with the most inventory, the biggest marketplace. He executed that strategy with the right capital. And I remember, it's actually an interesting little story. When I was at Prime Media, I was trying to buy the company called VacationRentals.com, and on the other side of the curtain, he was there trying to do the same thing. So we were trying to buy the same company. There were a bunch of chess pieces out there on the table, and I had an LOI to buy them for $44 million, and I thought, this is going to be great. We're going to own VacationRentals.com, and we're going to be the leader. And he trumped my deal, bought them for like $100 million, and ended up buying VRBO and 14 other companies, and he ended up raising several $billion. I ended up raising $20 million. And so, that was just firepower. It was a winner take all type of thing, and he was able to get the first pieces, then raise money, then buy more companies, but raise money, buy more companies. And so he was kind of always out there in the leadership position. And I'd say it's the brute force way to win, and so he succeeded. Airbnb is a total different animal, right? Because Airbnb they raised a lot of money eventually, but they came at it through the innovation. Anyone read The Innovator's Dilemma? So they did The Innovator's Dilemma. Whereas I was kind of the corporate M&A like Brian, thinking we're going to go acquire a company and build it up and we'll just become the biggest and the best. Airbnb totally innovated, and I think it's why they're the better company right now. So they ended up going at the industry by saying, well, we're going to go and we're going to do this all through technology. We're not going to buy anything. We're going to just build a platform, and the technology is going to be first and foremost. And as someone who was in that industry, just the labor it required to get the pictures and get the descriptions and get them on all the different websites, this was, as things were becoming digitized, it was an albatross behind my neck, Brian's neck, Expedia's neck. Like I knew all the people competing, and it was brutally hard to do it. Airbnb did several things right. They said, first of all, we're going to start where no one's looking. Remember, if you remember, I don't know if you do, but like Airbnb started by selling couches, right? And I remember like my board calling me up and said, hey, what do you think about Airbnb? I'm like, that couch surfing company? I don't think anything about them. That was like the stupidest thing I've ever said in my career. I was competing with VRBO and Expedia, and they said, well, we're going to just do these couches. And by doing the couches, they were able to focus just like on the rebar, in that innovator's dilemma situation, no one really paid attention to them. They had to innovate because it was so cheap. They had to make it all technology driven so that the people who had those couches would do the work. They would take the photos, they would load the photos, they would polish the descriptions, they would do all that work. I had dozens and dozens of people doing that. They would have make it self-service, so the people had to do it. And then the second thing is, because it was a couch and no one knew what the hell it was, you weren't competing with Expedia. So no one cared what the price was. And so they did a very clever pricing where they said, okay, for the couch, we're only going to charge you 5%. Whereas Expedia and VRBO and us, we were charging the supplier 20%. So it looked like they were so much cheaper, so the inventory just naturally went to them. They were charging 18%, but they were just charging the consumer the other piece. But because it was a couch, no one knew what the hell a couch should cost. Whereas if you could find the 4-bedroom condo, and you could find it on multiple sites, you're gonna price shop, so you had to be at price parity. So this whole side of the industry ended up being very strict around, we're all gonna sell this for $1,000, and then the different distribution channels, this one charges 20, this one charges 18, 15, and it was very competitive. We were fighting with each other, just like a red ocean, right? These guys had a blue ocean where no one cares. It's a couch. And I'm going to still get 18%, and I got to do any of the work. So the innovation that they had was a fundamentally advantaged model, because the inventory came to them naturally because they had a pricing advantage. They didn't have to do the work, so they could just focus on enabling the platform, and that became what it is today. So that model, there were two winners in the space. One was brute force, and one was innovation.
Great question.
Got one. So as such a competitive person, how do you kind of overcome failure? Kind of restoking that internal fire to keep going after you miss a target or, don't win something? What helps you?
So that's a great question, and I think I'm coming back in a week to talk about that exact topic. But the short answer is, that's when you grow. Like when you lift weights, you don't get stronger by being on the stage posing, right? It's when you break your muscles down and you fall down, we get stronger. And so I've had to learn that lesson later in my career, because I had so much success early in my career. I thought, well, I gotta keep running through walls. This is gonna be great. And then you later in your career, you hit something that's a roadblock. It's emotionally challenging. And what I am focused on is, what can I learn from those challenges, and how can I apply them for the next race or the next competition? And more importantly, how can I share them? Which is why I love the opportunity. Like I said, I think it's next Friday or something. I come back. I'm going to share a presentation with you guys about exactly that, the failure, and what I've learned from it.
Thanks. I'll be looking
Good
forward to
teaser.
it.
Yeah, that's a great teaser.
It's a great question. Yeah, I'm excited about it.
It's actually,
You learn a lot more about. The answer is you learn so much more from failure.
it's actually apropos to end with a teaser, just like all modern movies do
That's right.
nowadays.
Yep.
But, Julian, thank you so much for making the time.
Thank you for having me.
join
I
us today.
always enjoy talking with you guys.
Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks, guys.